I was born into a tribe that believed stars were not just lights, but ancestors moving overhead, watching, whispering, and guiding us across forgotten deserts. Hello, everyone. I'm glad you're here. Please like and subscribe so I can tell more interesting stories. Now let's get started. The first memory I have is of cold sand and my father's cracked hands pointing to the sky. He didn't speak much. When he did, his voice was like an old drum hollow, but certain. That night, we lay beside the fire wrapped in wool and silence, and he whispered, "That's your great-grandmother. She walks slow, but never forgets the way." I was 4. I believed him. In our tribe, the stars weren't just up there for sparkle. They were maps, warnings, bedtime stories, and sometimes jokes. We had names for each one. Some, like Raka the One-Eyed, were said to guard travelers. Others, like Bishno the Liar, were blamed when things went missing. If your goat wandered off Bishno. If your tea tasted like San Bishno again. We didn't use compasses. We didn't need calendars. We just needed clear skies and someone old enough to remember which ancestor did what. Nights in the desert were like ink. Stars burst through that darkness like broken glass. You could feel them in your skin if you stared long enough. My mother said, if you listened, you could hear them humming. Of course, that might have just been my stomach. We didn't always eat well, or at all. Once an outsider came through, he wore a wristwatch and asked where the nearest gas station was. My uncle pointed at the North Star and said, "Keep walking until your beard turns gray." I don't think he appreciated the humor. But seriously, time worked differently for us. The sun told us when to wake. The stars told us where to go. And the wind told us what mood the earth was in. We learned how to read all of it. It was survival, but also poetry. Historians still debate whether the nomadic star-following tribes of the desert originated independently or were remnants of lost civilizations. Personally, I think we were just stubborn romantics who didn't like settling for sand that stayed still. My grandmother was the real authority. She had hair like bird feathers and smelled faintly of smoke and pepper. She'd sit by the fire every night and recount tales that made your bones vibrate. She said we came from a people who chased comets until their feet bled, who believed light was a promise that never lied. One story she told, my favorite, involved a man who tried to catch a falling star. Not metaphorically, literally. He tied feathers to his arms and leapt from a cliff. Spoiler, he didn't catch it. But apparently, where he fell, water burst from the rock, and that's how one of our oases was born. Science might call it coincidence. I call it the first documented case of optimism with consequences. We lived simply. Days were for walking, hunting, or complaining about blisters. Nights were for laughter and storytelling. You learned quickly not to sleep with your mouth open unless you wanted a beetle to lodge its opinion in your throat. Fact break, by the way. Did you know ancient Bedouins sometimes used the position of Orion's belt to time childbirth rituals? Yeah. Beats Google Calendar, honestly. Anyway, back to me in the skies. I remember the first time I got to name a star. It was after a sandstorm. The sky was unusually clear, the kind of clear that makes your pupils dilate, like you just heard your crush say your name. I pointed to one near the horizon, faint but pulsing, and said, "That's mine." My father asked, "What's it called?" I thought hard. "Spitball." He blinked. Why? Because it looks like someone spat it into the sky and forgot. He laughed so hard, he nearly dropped the fire kettle. That name stuck. To this day, if anyone from our tribe sees that star, they call it Spitball. It's probably some ancient satellite or space junk, but it meant something to me. That's how our tribe worked. We added to the sky as we lived. If you were brave, funny, or tragic enough, you got a star. If not, well, maybe next lifetime. We never carved our names in stone. We never built pyramids or palaces. We told time by the moon and legacy by stardust. We remembered those who came before, not with gravestones, but with glowing points in the night. And so I grew up measuring love loss and direction by the sky. Of course, things couldn't stay like that forever. Stars, as it turns out, don't always behave. But that's for later. For now, picture me as a child, wide-eyed, lying on a fur mat next to a flickering fire, tracing the lines between Bishno Raka and my personal hero, Spitball, thinking nothing in the world could ever go wrong as long as the sky kept moving. I was wrong, but I still remember the warmth of that night, the way my grandmother's voice trembled as she sang old songs, the way the sand cooled just enough under your palms, and how the stars above looked so close. You thought maybe, just maybe, you could jump and catch one. My grandmother read the heavens like a map, and one night, under the smell of pine ash and roasted beetles, she told me we were not meant to stay still. She always said stillness was a form of death, that if the body didn't move, the soul would wander off without it bored and insulted. That particular night, I had just learned how to skin a lizard poorly. My hands smelled like burnt scales, and I had sand in places sand should never be. I flopped beside her and asked, "Why don't we ever settle down?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stared up, her eyes scanning the sky like it was a book and she'd lost her page. Then she said, "Because the sky doesn't." She spoke with this weight that made you sit straighter. Or maybe that was the beetle I accidentally sat on. Either way, I paid attention. "The sky is alive," she said. "Every time it shifts, it writes something new. Our job is to follow it before the ink dries." I didn't fully get it. I was 10 and more interested in why the stars never fell down like fruit. But her words stuck to my ribs like old honey. Fact time. Ancient Arab navigators often named stars by how they sounded when pronounced aloud. They believed the sound of a star's name influenced its temperament. Honestly, I think they were just having fun messing with apprentices. Anyway, back to Grandma. She had a pouch of bones. Bird, lizard. Probably one or two she wasn't supposed to have. And she'd toss them into the fire on certain nights, watching how the sparks leapt, how the shadows shifted. She called it consulting the council. One night, I asked her if it really worked. She said no, but it makes people feel less useless. That was the thing about her. She didn't lie, not really. She just made the truth more poetic, so you'd remember it better. She showed me how to track Polaris using only the curve of my palm, how to count time using the blinking of Betelgeuse. She also taught me how to make tea using cactus needles and something that suspiciously resembled lizard droppings. That was a long night. Still, we believed in patterns, in repetition, in the idea that the universe left fingerprints for those patient or desperate enough to notice. Historians still debate whether desert nomads developed celestial navigation independently or borrowed from ancient Mesopotamian systems. Grandma didn't care. Let them argue, she'd say. We've got places to be. She was the kind of person who packed before we even arrived. She believed every home was a temporary hello. We never stayed longer than 2 moons in one place. Just long enough to eat everything that didn't bite back and tell stories to the wind. Once we stayed near a dry ravine with a patch of plants that made your tongue go numb. A younger cousin thought it was lettuce. He spent 3 hours smiling and unable to close his mouth. We nicknamed him Joyface for the next 3 years. Still, we moved on. Everywhere we went, we carried fire. Not just the kind you cook with, but the kind you tell stories around. Fire to us was memory made visible. And it had a smell sharp earthy, laced with smoke, and something sweet, like old bark. That smell stayed on our clothes and our hair, and if you believe the elders in our dreams, once in a place where the stars dipped so low, you could almost hear them rustle. My grandmother stopped abruptly. She looked up, face suddenly taut. "That's new," she muttered. It was a faint red glimmer near the edge of Orion's belt. We watched it for an hour. It didn't blink, didn't move, just watched back. The next day, we changed course. Nobody asked why. When Grandma changed direction, we followed. Even the camels didn't argue. Sometimes I'd overhear the adults saying she was part oracle, part madwoman. "She talks to bones," one uncle whispered, "and listens when they answer." But she got us where we needed to go. Always. Through droughts, sickness, and once a sudden hailstorm in the middle of a dust season. No one could explain that one. Odd fact, there's a beetle in the Namib Desert that collects water by doing headstands. Honestly, I've seen some of our old men do that too. Different purpose, same technique. By the time I was 15, I could read the sky almost as well as she could. I could tell when a storm was coming just by the way Venus shifted color at twilight. I could predict a birth based on moon position and someone's weird craving for beetle stew. But I didn't feel what she felt. I didn't hear the sky whisper. I didn't dream of spirals or see glowing figures behind the stars like she claimed to. One night, I asked her, "What if it's all nonsense? What if we've just been following shiny dots for generations and no one wants to admit they're lost?" She smiled. "Then we'll be beautifully lost." I didn't like that answer, but I remembered it. Years later, after she passed quietly under a sky, I found her pouch of bones and a little scrap of cloth tucked inside. It said, "The stars don't tell you where to go. They just remind you that you're not alone when you do." It was stained with beetle ink and fire grease, but still legible. I keep it with me now, folded in my shirt, close to the place where my ribs still carry her voice. Even now, I catch myself looking up at tracing shapes I thought I forgot. Sometimes I see something new. Sometimes I swear I hear her laugh. One winter, the stars stopped. Literally, they held in the same spot for weeks, and half the tribe thought it meant death was coming. The other half said it meant love. I remember the moment we noticed. It was the third night of frost, the kind that snuck under your blanket and made your teeth whisper secrets to each other. The fire cracked lazy and low, and I was chewing on a piece of dried fig that tasted like regret when someone gasped. Not a dramatic gasp, more like someone realized they left the firewood outside. Quiet, sharp. "Look," someone murmured. We all tilted our heads upward. Same sky, same constellations, same cold. But something was off. My body knew it before my brain did. The stars, they weren't moving. Now, normally you stare long enough and you see the slow, majestic crawl of the heavens. But that night, it was like someone pressed pause on the sky. Polaris, Orion, even Spitball, all frozen in place. At first, I thought it was me. Maybe my eyes were tired. Maybe the fig was cursed. But by the fifth night of celestial stillness, even the camels were looking concerned. And trust me, it takes a lot to impress a camel. Grandma wasn't around anymore to throw bones and tell us what to think. So we panicked the old-fashioned way, arguing in circles. "This is the end," said one elder. "The sky's angry. We've stayed too long." "No, it's a blessing," said another. "A love omen. The heavens are pausing to admire us." I remember whispering, "Maybe the stars are just tired." That didn't help. We tried everything. Songs, incense, even rubbing owl feathers on our cheeks, don't ask. One guy named Halim tried to climb a tree to get closer to the stars and ask them directly. He fell, twice. Historians still debate whether certain ancient tribes experienced sky-based anomalies due to volcanic ash, atmospheric changes, or psychological mass perception. Me, I think the universe was messing with us for fun. To be fair, we were overdue for a crisis. Every few seasons, something weird happened. A drought that only affected left-handed people, a rainstorm that fell upward for 3 seconds, a goat that sang lullabies in its sleep. But this was next level. The lack of movement did something strange to us. Without the sky shifting, we didn't know when to move on. Our tribe had always followed change like it was sacred, but now we were caught in celestial traffic. People started acting twitchy. Halim declared he was in love with the North Star. He wrote poems. He made a necklace out of crushed quartz and sang to it, loudly, at dawn. My cousin Rhea swore she saw a ghost child tracing constellations in the sand with a stick of bone. No one else saw her, but we all started giving that patch of sand a respectful amount of side-eye. Me, I felt unmoored, like someone had pulled the floor out from under my dreams. I kept waking up in the middle of the night with the urge to run, but nowhere to run to. It's a weird thing being guided by something that won't move, like following a song that suddenly forgets its chorus. Odd fact, there's a frog in Madagascar that goes into a trance-like state during dry season and doesn't move for months. Locals call it the invisible guest. I started relating to that frog. Eventually, the elders held a council. Lots of grumbling, lots of beard stroking. They stood around a fire and tried to make their opinions sound older than they were. I stood at the edge of the circle, pretending to adjust my sandals while eavesdropping with gusto. Stillness is a test, one said. The sky is waiting to see if we move without permission. Or it's a trap, another muttered. We were meant to go east weeks ago. The animals know it. Look at the lizards, they've stopped sunbathing. Someone brought up the idea of splitting up, following different stars, or shadows, or instinct. That last one made my eyebrows twitch. I didn't want to split, but I also didn't want to sit around waiting for Halim to propose to a constellation. That night, I lay awake chewing cactus resin and watching the motionless stars. They looked smug, like they knew something we didn't. Or maybe they were just bored. Then something weird happened. A single star blinked, just one. Barely a flicker, but it moved. No one else saw it, or believed me. I tried waking my cousin. She rolled over and muttered something about soup, but I knew what I saw, and I couldn't unsee it. The next morning, I packed quietly. Just a small satchel dried fruit water skin grandma's cloth. I stood at the edge of camp staring west. I didn't know where I was going, just that I couldn't stay in a place where the sky had stopped breathing. And then behind me, a whisper. Wait, it was Raya. Her eyes were wide and unblinking. I saw the ghost child again, she said. She pointed the same way. Of course she did. We didn't tell anyone. Not yet. We just started walking. The stars didn't move again for a long time, but neither did we look back. With no stars to guide us, the elders split, and I followed the ones who chose movement over wading through storms that flayed skin and dreams that smelled like salt water. The tribe cracked like a dried fig. It didn't happen all at once. There were no screams, no knives, no grand declarations. Just slow, deliberate disagreements that built up like sand inside your boots. And eventually, like sand it wore through the soul, half stayed behind. They pitched their tents a little tighter, dug their fire pits a little deeper, and convinced themselves the stars would start moving again. Once they'd proven their patience. The rest of us, we got tired of waiting for the sky to remember us. We left quietly one morning. No goodbyes, No ceremony, just a few nods, a handful of glances that said, "We hope we're wrong, and you're right." Then we turned away from the still stars and walked into nothing. It was me, Raya Old Marek with knees like squeaky hinges, two boys who spoke in riddles, and Nura, the youngest elder, which is kind of like being the tallest mouse. She believed movement was sacred even when direction was missing. The first few days were hopeful, quiet but hopeful. We used the wind to steer the sand to measure. Nura swore by the shape of clouds. Raya claimed ghost child dreams. I used, well, mostly vibes. Fact break. Some ancient desert travelers used the flight pattern of buzzards to locate water. Buzzards apparently are nature's very dramatic GPS. We saw 0 buzzards. Then the sandstorm hit. Not the pretty Instagram filter kind. This one was biblical. It came in like a whispered threat, low and lazy. Then it screamed. We barely had time to tie our faces before it swallowed the horizon. Sand in your ears. Sand in your teeth. Sand in your thoughts. It stripped us of speech. For 2 days, all we did was grunt, cough, and gesture like confused mimes. Old Merrick lost his left eyebrow. Never grew back. The storm left us looking like forgotten artifacts. Clothes, shredded skin, raw souls cracked open just enough to let doubt in. We kept walking anyway. One night, after the sand finally settled, we camped near a boulder, shaped suspiciously like a sleeping hippo. I was chewing a date pit, not eating it, just punishing it, when Nura sat beside me. "You think we're lost?" she said, not asking. I shrugged. "I think we're somewhere. That's better than nowhere." She nodded. "The still ones will rot. Still water turns to poison." I looked up at the sky. Still frozen. The stars hadn't budged since we left. "Then what does that make us?" I asked. "Clean poison," she laughed. "Salt, sharp, preserved, necessary." Historians still debate whether nomadic breakaway factions formed new tribal lineages or were absorbed back into their roots. Either way, the in-between was brutal. A week in, we ran out of dried figs. I didn't mourn them. We started eating cactus flesh, roasting lizards, and drinking from shallow pits that tasted like old coins. Our dreams got weird. Nura claimed she heard the earth humming lullabies. Raya dreamed of water that bent upward. I kept hearing bells. No one else heard the bells. At some point, we reached the edge of a salt basin. The ground turned white-crusted, like someone overcooked the world. We tried to walk across. Bad idea. The wind picked up salt flakes and threw them at our faces like vengeful butterflies. My lips cracked so hard they bled smiles. Raya's boots disintegrated. Mirik started calling everyone elbow. We turned back. That night, we shared half a canteen and stared into a fire that smelled like regret and roasted beetle legs. There's a point in every journey where the silence stops being peaceful and starts sounding like accusation. We'd reached it. I couldn't sleep. The bells kept coming, soft at first, then louder, like metal laughing in the wind. Then came the dream. I was standing on a dune alone. The sky was black. No stars. Not even spitball. Just a single flame in the distance floating. I walked toward it. With each step, the flame moved further. But I wasn't frustrated. I was comforted. It felt like being chased by something kind. When I woke, I had salt crusted in my eyelashes and a small stone clenched in my fist. I didn't remember picking it up. It was smooth, cold, and shaped like a teardrop. I kept it. Odd fact. In some African desert cultures, children are told stories of talking rocks that hum during sandstorms. They're said to contain the voices of old wanderers. I don't know what my rock said, but it kept me company. The next few days were better. Not easier, just less painful. We found a ridge that offered shade. a dry stream bed filled with edible moss. Raya claimed she saw a star twitch. It didn't. I looked for hours. Nothing. But hope is strange. Sometimes it doesn't need proof, just repetition. We kept moving west. Every night I stared at the sky. Every morning I felt like we were closer to something. Not salvation, just a different kind of lost. The desert changed. The sand turned redder. The wind smelled less like ash, more like pepper and rain. We started seeing insects with glowing eyes. Once we saw a bird with feathers like mirrors. It flew in slow, lazy spirals above us, never flapping once. I started dreaming of water again. Not drinking it, swimming in it, floating face up while stars watched from below. I think I missed the stars more than I missed the people we left behind. Still, I didn't regret leaving. Sometimes the wrong road is better than no road. We found shelter in a cave filled with handprints older than memory, and inside it, a constellation was carved into the ceiling. Except one star was missing. It was Merrick who spotted the crack in the cliffside, which is ironic because his eyesight was famously bad. He once mistook a sheep for a priest. But that morning, he squinted up at a jagged wall of stone rising like a baked wave, tapped his stick against a shadowed notch, and muttered, "That looks like a frown." It did. A long, dry frown etched into the mountain's face. We followed his instinct part, curiosity, part desperation, and found a narrow slit just wide enough for skinny people and for me if I held my breath. Inside was silence. Not the kind of silence you get in the desert, where the wind is always fiddling with something. No, this was old silence. Silence that presses its fingers gently over your lips and says, "Shh, someone is still listening." The air smelled like wet stone and forgotten sleep. We lit a fire. The walls bloomed orange. That's when we saw them. Handprints, hundreds of them. Some tiny, like children. Others massive, like they belonged to people who wrestled mountains. They lined the walls and spirals and clusters, some layered over each other, like generations saying "me too," Raya whispered. They were here. I didn't ask who they were. It felt rude. We slept there that night. First real sleep in days. No bells, no biting sand. Just the hum of a place that had seen too much and judged none of it. In the morning, we explored deeper. The cave twisted like an old man's memory, curves and loops that led nowhere until they did. Then we found the ceiling. It was a dome perfectly smooth, like someone had taken a giant spoon and scooped the world upside down, and on it, carved with ash and time, was a map of stars. Not Dot's actual carvings, precise and deep. There was Orion, Polaris, even Spitball. I swear on Merrick's one eyebrow. But one star was missing. There was a gap, just a single, hollow space where there should have been light. We stared at it for hours. Nura said, "Maybe it fell." Marik suggested, "Maybe someone stole it." Raya whispered, "Maybe it never existed." I touched it. The stone was cool smoother than the rest, like it had been worn down by centuries of hands wondering the same thing. Historians still debate whether ancient cave constellations were purely ceremonial or served navigational purposes. Standing under that ceiling, I had a different theory. It was a story, and that missing star? It was the part we were meant to add. We stayed in the cave for 3 days. Not just resting, listening. That's what it felt like the rocks were waiting for us to hear something. I kept dreaming. But this time, not of bells. This time, I saw a figure standing at the missing star's spot. A woman with no face, her hands raised like she was reaching for something just out of sight. When I told the group, Raya went pale. She'd had the same dream. We started calling the missing star the one who waits. Weird fact. There's a cave in Argentina where the handprints are made by spraying pigment from the mouth. That's right, prehistoric graffiti spit. I wonder if our ancestors also blew ash through reeds and laughed about it. Noura believed we were meant to bring the star back. "It's not gone," she said, tracing the empty spot with her finger. "It's just waiting for the right eyes to see it." She meant us. I wasn't so sure. That night, the sky outside was still frozen. But inside the cave, when the fire flickered just right, I could swear that missing star flickered back, like a wink. We didn't stay long after that. Something in the cave made it clear, rest, yes, but not forever. So we packed, carefully, gratefully. As we left, I touched the wall and whispered thank you. The air shifted, just a little, like the cave exhaled. Historians claim some nomadic cultures believed caves were not just shelters, but places where the sky touched the earth. Having been in that cave, I don't just believe it, I felt it. Outside, the wind had softened. The desert smelled different, richer, like wet bark and distant rivers. And as we turned west again, I looked back at the mountain's frown. It was smiling. A woman from a rival tribe arrived alone, wearing a necklace made from the missing star. And when she spoke, it wasn't words, it was thunder wrapped in honey. We saw her from far off, a speck against the red dunes. At first we thought she was a mirage, the kind that dances on heat and disappears when you blink. But she didn't vanish. She got closer, and she kept walking slow and steady, like she was walking toward a memory. No one spoke. We all just watched her approach. She was young, not much older than me, but her eyes were old, like desert glass that had seen too many storms. Her skin was dusted with white clay, and her robe shimmered like beetle shells in moonlight. But what caught my breath, what made Merrick stop chewing mid-beetle, was the necklace. It hung just below her collarbone, a single black stone, smooth, teardrop-shaped, cool even under the sun. It was exactly the shape of the missing star in the cave. I reached for the stone I'd found in my dream, the one clenched in my hand that morning. I pulled it from my pouch. Same shape, same feel, but hers glowed, just barely, like it remembered something I didn't. She stopped at the edge of our campfire. We all stared. Noura was the first to speak. Name. The woman tilted her head. Then she smiled. Not like someone greeting strangers. More like someone who already knew us and was amused by our confusion. She said, "I am the one you forgot." No one moved. Then she added, "But I forgive you." Her voice was like thunder wrapped in honey. Soft, deep, powerful. It vibrated behind your ribs. Historians still debate whether female leaders in nomadic tribes held religious, diplomatic, or prophetic roles. This woman. She felt like all three had merged, taken a walk, and decided to wear beetle shell robes. Raya whispered, "She's from the Cloud People." I blinked. "The who?" "The tribe that walks above sandstorms," Raya said. "They follow nothing, not stars, not rivers, not even wind, just instinct." I was going to say, that sounded like a great way to get lost forever. But then I looked at the woman again. She didn't look lost. She looked returned. She sat by the fire like she'd always been there, pulled a small bundle from her pouch, dried fruits, nuts, and what looked suspiciously like lizard jerky, and passed them around without asking. We ate. No one questioned it. Later, after the fire dimmed and most had drifted to sleep, I stayed awake. The stone she wore glowed faintly in the ember's light. My own stone stayed cold. I sat beside her. "You knew about the missing star," I said. She didn't look at me. "You felt it missing." She was right. Then she turned to me and said something I didn't expect. "It's not a star." I frowned. "What is it?" "A reminder." "Of what?" She leaned closer. "That not all light lives in the sky." Odd fact. There's a species of deep-sea shrimp that punches so fast it creates light underwater. Literal sonic light. Nature's way of proving it has no chill. That's what this woman felt like, a punch of light where you didn't expect it. She told stories of caves that breathed fire, of tribes that burned maps as rituals, of a boy who walked into a storm and came out with a voice that shattered silence. She said the necklace was given to her by a dream, and that she had walked for weeks with no water, no guide, only the image of a handprint that glowed behind her eyes. That cave, she said, it called me, just like it called you. She reached into her pouch and pulled out a shard of bone flat curved, etched with the same constellation from the cave ceiling. But this, she said, is how it began. The map was never meant to be finished, only shared. Nura believed her, instantly. Merrick nodded like he'd seen this coming his whole life and just hadn't gotten around to mentioning it. Me, I wanted to doubt, but I couldn't. When she touched the stone on her necklace to mine, they pulsed together. Just once. Like two heartbeats syncing. She whispered, "You were never meant to follow stars." I whispered back, "Then what?" She smiled. "You were meant to become them." That night, I didn't dream of bells. I dreamed of voices. Dozens, hundreds, all speaking at once in languages I couldn't understand, but feelings I could wonder. Grief, joy, distance, return. The next morning, the sky moved. Just a little, just enough. The woman stood at the edge of Camp Eyes to the east. "We go," she said. "Where?" I asked. She turned, smiling that maddening, knowing smile. Forward. The tribe was never the same after her. We stopped following the stars and became them, instead writing our own light into the night, one breath at a time. We didn't ask her to lead us. She just started walking, and we followed. No arguments, no debates. Not even from Nura, who had led us through storms and silences and salt-crusted hellscapes. Not even from Merrick, who once argued with a cactus for 2 hours and lost. There was something about her presence that made decisions dissolve. Not because she was loud or forceful, she wasn't. She was stillness, wearing motion, the kind of stillness that moves not with effort, but inevitability. She didn't look back, and we didn't need her to. We walked through lands that looked nothing like the maps we'd scribbled in the sand. Blackened trees twisted like frozen dancers. Hills hummed in low tones when the wind passed through them. We saw lights underground, glimmers beneath the soil, like roots whispering secrets. One night, we reached a valley lit by its own breath. No moon, no stars, just a pale internal glow that made our shadows look like stories unraveling. We made camp there, and she finally told us her name. "Asha," she said. "It means what remains after fire." I nodded like I understood. I didn't, but I wanted to. She taught us not to look up for guidance but inward, said the stars were only mirrors, crude reflections of what we carried in our ribs all along. She told Raya that her dreams weren't madness, but echoes. Told Merrick that even broken knees can walk sacred paths. She told me, I was still listening for something I already heard. Historians still debate whether tribal identity can survive transformation without collapse. Ours didn't collapse. It molted, slowly, quietly, like a lizard shedding what it no longer needed. We stopped naming the stars after ancestors. We started naming ourselves after stars. Asha said, "Every person is a constellation of choices. You want to shine, make them count." Some nights, we sat in a circle, carving stories into bone. Not to preserve the past, but to remember that it had teeth. We tied those bones to trees. Let the wind carry their rattle. People began to find us. Not many, just a few. Travelers who looked at the sky and felt something missing. They came quietly, carried water, shared food, left behind something of themselves. A song, a name, a scar. We became something else, not a tribe, a trail, no leader, no map, just footsteps that hummed with memory and pulsed with direction. I found myself walking ahead more often, not leading, inviting. One day, I held my dream stone to the sun. It caught the light, and then just once it glowed. That night, I stood beside Asha, and we watched the stars finally shift again. Not all at once, but enough. She whispered, "Now you see." I nodded. We were never following them. She smiled. They were following you. And just like that, she was gone. No goodbye. No vanishing in a puff of magic dust. Just not there. Raya said she walked into a patch of light and never came out. Merrick swore he heard her laughter on the wind a week later. I think she simply moved on to a place we weren't meant to follow. That was her gift, after all. Direction, not destination. We kept walking. The sky kept shifting. The stars, those stubborn ancient lights, began forming new shapes. Shapes we hadn't seen before. Shapes that looked like hands, like trails, like questions we were finally brave enough to ask. Odd fact, there's a theory that starlight from some constellations is actually just ghosts of collapsed systems traveling thousands of years to reach our eyes. I like that. We shine even when we're gone. Now, when people ask me where we're going, I say, forward. When they ask what we're following, I say, ourselves. We still sing at night. We still build fires. But we don't tell stories of those who once led us. We tell stories of the light we carry now. And every now and then, when I lie back and stare up, I see a flicker at the edge of Orion. It's not spitball. It's something new, something just beginning. So that's the story. The tribe who followed the stars and then didn't. We began by chasing ancient lights across a sea of sand, hungry for guidance, desperate for rhythm. We believed the sky held our ancestors, our destiny, our stories. And for a while, it did, until it didn't. When the stars stopped moving, we fractured. Some waited, hoping stillness would bloom into purpose. The rest of us walked. Into storms, into hunger, into doubt. But also into caves that remembered us. Into dreams that whispered. Into a woman named Asha, who wore starlight on a string and thunder in her throat. She reminded us that maybe the stars were never above us. Maybe they were within us. Maybe the constellations were just reflections of what we already carried. So we changed. Slowly. Like dust turning to fire. We stopped naming the sky and started naming ourselves, not in arrogance, but in understanding. That we were always part of the story. That moving forward doesn't always require direction. Sometimes it just requires faith in motion. The stars move again now, but we don't chase them anymore. We walk our own paths. We light our own night. And somewhere out there, in the dark between galaxies, I hope Asha is watching, smiling, because the trail she started, we're still walking it, one breath at a time,